So quite a lot to catch up with Liz and Jake on. Liz, can I just start with you? Gillian Keegan says that your policy of abolishing tax breaks for public schools, private schools, is hurting the aspiring middle classes.
Can I just say what I think about that interview? She couldn't say how she's going to fund teachers' salaries. She couldn't say which of the so-called poor university classes...
So you didn't believe when she said, you know, she's cutting out these courses that we don't know about.
And thank you for asking her both about how she's going to pay for something, for teachers' salaries. She couldn't say which courses she's going to cut. She couldn't say when this guidance is going to come out for teachers. And she said nothing about the aspirations of ordinary working and middle-class parents whose kids are in state schools who want to hear more from the government. I think I give that...
particular point. Do you worry, though, that some middle-class parents who, you know, save to send their kids to a fee-paying school will be alienated from...
I want all parents to get the very best for their children. And what we're saying here is, let's make sure when money is tight that there is a fair playing field here and that we put that money into our state schools. And I cannot believe... Now, I came into politics to rip down the barriers to success. We've heard nothing from the government how we're going to get more kids from deprived backgrounds into universities, and nothing about how we're going to get the best heads and teachers into our schools and tackling poor-performing schools. I'd say that was, at very best, a C+ interview from the Education Secretary.
Jake, I don't think you're supposed to laugh at that.
It was quite a good joke, but it was wrong.
But can I just ask you on what she was saying at the end, which is that she's committed to giving guidance to schools that they should consult parents if a school student wants to change the way they identify in terms of
no, I don't really think this is much of a political issue. I'm a parent. If my son goes to school and has his blue inhaler, when we pick him up from the school gates, the teacher says, just to let you know, he's taken his puffer today because we were on sports day or whatever, and we sort of think about that when he's going to bed and see if he needs, if he's got... if we're going to have to give it to him again. The idea that he or any of my children would go to school and live in a different gender, and as a parent I wouldn't be told, is absolutely absurd.
I mean, people would say there are some cases where there are kids whose parents desperately disagree, and that there is a risk in teachers not exercise judgment.
Well, sorry, that may be in some cases. I actually think if you want a great quality education for your kids, it's a team effort between parents at home and the school, and I think you get to the point where the school is hiding things from the parents, that will break down. I think the point she was making about whether it's guidance or legislation, I understand that there's some discussion about the Equalities Act needs changing to do this. If it needs changing, let's get on and do it, because parents in this country do not want, and I say as a parent myself, and I think it's across politics actually, do not want their children changing gender at school and not to be told.
Tons more I'm going to pick up with both of you. Anushka.
You're about to hear from Tony Blair. When he became Prime Minister in 1997, he promised change after 18 years of Conservative rule. Keir Starmer wants to do the same after 14 years. But the context is very different. If Mr Starmer becomes Prime Minister, he is inheriting a much weaker economy. This looks at productivity growth, which is one way at looking at how well the economy is doing. You can see that strong upward trend that we were on in 1997 and all the way up to when we had the economic crash in around 2008. But since then, a dramatic shift with productivity flattening quite considerably. Now, add into that the ratio of public sector debt to GDP. This is 1997, well below 50%. It has now hit 100%. And that is politically very difficult because people want help right now. And here is one reason. This shows growth in real incomes. In 1997, under Blair, they were rising really, really sharply. Look at this incline. Now, they're pretty much stagnating, although, as Robert said, that might change slightly. But people are feeling the squeeze. So they might want a Labour government to do what the last one did, which I can just show you here. Between 1997 and 2010, they increased education spending by 83% and doubled spending on health. But Keir Starmer is promising to reduce debt, and with the economy as it is, that means he is not promising to spend much, including not promising to end the two-child limit on benefits. Robert.
Thanks, Anushka. So, as Anushka said, earlier today, I met the former Prime Minister Tony Blair with an election not much more than a year away, I asked him how conditions today for Keir Starmer as Labour leader compared with what he'd had to deal with in 1996 ahead of his 1997 landslide victory.
Well, back then, the economy was in recovery. You could look forward to maybe more than 2% growth, which is growth that allows you to fund your public services properly. And there were lots of things we had to do. We had to repair public services. There was a big social programme, constitutional programme. But in economic terms, we were, John Major and Ken Clarke, to be fair, had done a reasonable job in stabilising things. But today, I'm afraid, and look, it's not all the government's fault because other countries are in, to some degree, similar positions, although I think our position's probably worse than most. But the truth is today, we are spending more than ever before, taxing more, with large levels of debt and poor outcomes in public services. So it's very difficult for an incoming government because there isn't a lot of freedom of manoeuvre.
I mean, the state of the public finances in this country is, well, they're shockingly fragile and weak. That means it's incredibly difficult to spend the kind of money that one would need to do to fix public services. So what could any Prime Minister do in those circumstances?
Make the reforms and use technology to do it. You see, I think even if you had extra money, the levels of spending are very, very high. The levels of taxation are high. So I think even if we didn't have an immediate problem, which we do because of cost of living and inflation and so on, I think for any government that comes in today, the question is not how do you spend more public money? The question is how do you get value for the public money you spend? And the answer to that, which is the thing I keep talking about, is this technology revolution is completely different from anything that's gone before, but it offers government the opportunity to drive through efficiency and change. So just to give you an example, during COVID, in furlough and during the energy crisis, the subsidies for people's energy bills, if we had the right national data infrastructure in this country, which combined different sets of data, we could have targeted that help much, much more than we did and saved billions of pounds by doing it.
And what about the privacy issues that this raises?
Well, I think these privacy issues are overdone. Government already has this data. For example, government has data around your income, has data around your household. What it doesn't have at the moment is the capacity to put all that together. So in the energy crisis, for example, we couldn't really figure out, you might have someone in a large house but be a poorer person, or someone with a very wealthy income but a smaller household. So it was very difficult to merge those bits of data and target the help. That's why we ended up spending as much as we did. And COVID.
And is it the age, can I just pick you up on that? For you, therefore, is the age of universalism, as it were, can we just not afford that anymore? You've just got to tailor help to where it's needed most.
Well, we already don't have the principle of universalism in most of the benefits we pay. The reason we didn't target it was not because we didn't want to, but because we couldn't. We didn't have the technical means. But we have that today. And, for example, in public sector procurement today, there's no doubt about it, you could save a huge amount of money.
But you believe that any government has to work more closely, for example, in health with the private sector. How do you win that argument?
Well, I don't think it's that difficult to win because it's all about providing a better service for people. And, especially as technology starts changing the way you deliver healthcare, you're going to have lots of different things that are able to be delivered by the private sector in partnership with the National Health Service. And it's not, provided you're not forcing people to pay for basic healthcare, I don't think it matters that you have a partnership between public and private sector. And we should just work, we need a thriving private sector alongside a public sector.
And where do you draw the line between what should be free at the point of use for everybody and what people should pay for?
Well, it should be, the healthcare should be free at the point of use for people. But, for example, if you take the NHS app that we were all kind of using during the COVID crisis and you build that into a proper electronic health record, and for example, supposing you get a spot on your leg and you're not sure exactly whether it's serious or not, there are people who can do the imaging for you and send you back a result that doesn't cost you much money. What I'm saying is for example, you could have people advertising that they can do this for you, and you can wait for the NHS, or you could use them. You're not doing this for the things that are going to really matter to people's health, but there are lots of these types of intervention in healthcare that take pressure off the system. So what I'm saying really is that the whole, and personally I find this an exciting project for government, they should be thinking in every single area of the public sector, how do we use technology to do things completely different and reduce costs? Because in the end, we should be spending less and taxing less than we are at the moment.
So after the break, I'll ask Tony Blair essentially where he agrees and disagrees with Keir Starmer, and believe it or not, I'll be asking something similar of another former Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. Gosh, so much variety. Don't go away. Welcome back. In the second part of my interview with Tony Blair, I reminded him that he'd interviewed Keir Starmer at his own conference only yesterday. Pointed out they were both trained as lawyers and wondered what else he felt he had in common with today's Labour leader, I suppose, as a personality.
Well, I don't know, but I think what I do know about him is that when he took the Labour Party over after the Corbyn period, we were on the brink of extinction, and now he's I could say we're on the brink of government. We got a fair shot at being the next government. So that is.
Is he more ruthless than you? He's massively changed the structure of the party, thrown out Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, no, I think he's very, very tough. He's very tough. It's very easy to underestimate him because he's not flamboyant, but he's pretty immovable when he sets his sight on something, and he set his sight on governing. And, like he's being at the moment, he's being very tough with the Labour Party about spending commitments. And I think he's absolutely right. He's just saying, look, we can't, if we're saying it's as bad as it is, we can't just make unfunded promises.
So to be clear, you think he was right to say no to lifting the 2-child limit on universal credit?
Well, I should imagine he, like me, is probably completely opposed to it. But the question is, can you commit that you're going, before you get in and before you see what the state of things are, can you commit to changing it? And
shouldn't he just said don't know?
No, you can never say that. I'm afraid. I mean, I can say that now because I'm not in frontline politics, but no.
That's interesting. And look, I may be wrong about this because memory plays tricks. I'm pretty sure this close to the 97 election, I had a clearer idea of what you and Gordon wanted to do in an active sense than I think I know about what Keir Starmer wants to do. Is that fair?
No, I think it's a bit the memory playing tricks.
Really?
Yeah, I do, because our commitments were really limited before we came into power.
Now let's talk a bit about AI. It's like you, I'm absolutely persuaded of the power of this technology. I think it is leading to an industrial revolution. Where would you advise any government to deploy it within the public sector? So
I think it is, look, you're probably much better at actually using technology than me. I'm somebody who's grown up and was Prime Minister when technology was a thing, but not the thing it is today. So even though I can't always use it well, I have studied enough and talked to enough people, and one of the advantages of being out of office is you can do that. This is like the Industrial Revolution. And so it's not I'm picking out one or two things you do. I would literally be reorganizing government, and then I would go through department by department, public service by public service, education. It's got massive applications there.
And then finally, I do believe, however positive AI will be in terms of improving output, productivity, however much wealth it may create over the next few years, there's also going to be massive disruption to the labour market. Some people are going to lose their jobs. Some people's jobs are going to have to be completely reconfigured. One of the things that worries me is I don't see any political leader really giving enough thought to this extraordinary dislocation and disruption we face.
Yeah, well, that's another reason for why you have to reorganise government around it, because you're right. I mean, when I asked one of the leaders in this technology, is it very good or very bad? He said it's very good and very bad. He said it's going to be, because you can use this technology, it's general purpose technology, you can use it to do really bad stuff, right? And you're right, it will displace a lot of jobs, particularly white-collar jobs. But that's how government's going to have to work out what that means, how it takes people through this process of change, and how it makes sure that people get the reskilling and the retraining they need. But the point about this revolution is you can't turn your back on it. You know, you either engage with it or you're going to get left behind.
Tony Blair, very good to see you.
Thank you.
Liz, Tony Blair says that by historical standards, public spending and taxes are too high. Do you agree with that?
I mean, he's absolutely right to say improving our public services isn't just about more money alone. There needs to be change.
But is the proportion that we spend in this country too high?
Well, I certainly think within the health service, we're spending too much money on keeping elderly people stuck in hospital when they could be better cared for in the community and at home. And let me just take one of the really important things he's talking about, which is AI and the potential that it has in an area like health, which is my responsibility. It could make huge improvements in diagnosing malignant tumours earlier on. It could look at big data and identify people who are at risk of sepsis or hospital readmissions and prevent that from happening. And it can really give individual patients the power, much more personalised information about their health and remind them of the things they need to do to keep healthy. These are important changes that we would need to be doing anyway, but when money is so tight, are absolutely essential for the future.
Hold on a second ago, you were giving the Education Secretary, I think, a C+, and criticising her for saying that actually she needs to find savings in her department to make up pay rises. I listened to that and thought, hallelujah, because tax is so high, public spending is so high.
You agree with Tony Blair?
Gillian is focused on...
So you agree? So you're more in agreement with Blair than...
But Gillian and Tony Blair are focused on saying, look, this isn't government cash, this is taxpayers' cash, and it has to be spent officially. A moment ago, you were criticising that. Apparently now it's a good idea because Tony Blair said it.
I was saying she couldn't actually tell us where those savings were coming from. It was something in future.
No, hallelujah,
winging a prayer.
Winging a prayer. For once, not asking the taxpayer to pick up the bill. And we know that's what...
OK, I don't think this is going anywhere particularly constructive. I'm going to come back to both of you in a minute. I am going to come back to both of you because I've got to go to Anushka.
Thank you. Keir Starmer saying he would keep the two-child benefit cap has caused controversy. Let's look at why. The Resolution Foundation have looked at the proportion of children in relative poverty split up by family size. So the green line at the bottom here are those in two-sibling families. The orange line in the middle is 3+, and then the red is 4+. So when Labour came into power in 1997, over 60% of children in families of 4 kids or more were in relative poverty. Now, it was the party's mission to drive down those numbers, and they did, but then austerity started to reverse that trend with that new policy, that limit coming in around here in around 2017. And you can see the dramatic shift since then. This projects forward to 27-28, suggesting by then 55% of children in families with 3 or more siblings and nearly 80% of those in 4 or more will be in relative poverty. Robert.
So, Liz, look, almost 80% of children in families of 4 or more in poverty. It is extraordinary that your party, which within recent memory committed itself to abolishing child poverty, will not commit to abolish the 2-child limit on these very important payments.
I think Keir was being honest with the Labour Party and, more importantly, with the public, that we will not make spending commitments, that we can't show exactly how we'll fund them, and that we can't be sure that we'll keep them. We have seen the results of that when Liz Truss made unfunding spending commitments, and it was working people who were paying the price. Because we actually believe that fiscal credibility is the rock on which we build everything else. that we do. And unless we can get the economy growing again, we won't have the money to do what we want to do and what we actually did in government, which was to dramatically reduce child poverty. And let me just say this, the really big issue we face is that more than 2/3 of children growing up in poverty are in a household where at least one person works. So whereas back in 1997, we needed a floor, the minimum wage, under which people couldn't fall, but the future, we need a ladder so that people can get good jobs, better paid jobs, and that is the prize for families and the prize for tackling child poverty.
It's not going to surprise you that I did talk about this very issue with a party leader that I think you sort of less in tune with than the current one. He is Jeremy Corbyn, and actually I began by sort of making the point that Liz has been making, that the public finances are in such a dire state that surely Keir Starmer, many would say, is right to refuse to increase the two-child limit on universal credit. I wonder what he said.
He's wrong. The two-child limit is cruel, impoverishes families of 3 or more children. To abolish it would cost about £1 billion a year.
1.4, I think the IMF said.
1.4.
Yeah.
Not very much when you look at all the other issues in public spending, but the massive improvement it would make in the lives of those families, in the lives of those children, and I see it as an investment for the future and a big step towards ending child poverty. I just think it's a big mistake to rule it out.
I mean, his view is winning an election is more important than anything else. And in order to be confident of that, he has got to show that, quotes, he's a safe pair of hands with the economy. Is that a misjudgment?
There's a very strange supposition that you can't win the election because you promise to try and do something to end child poverty. Poor people have votes as well, you know. Those families have got votes as well. Their relatives have got votes as well. And if they are struggling, and I know plenty of families in my own community who 3 or 4, 5 children in some cases, are really struggling, and they would look askance at a Labour proposal which says, well, sorry, your problem, your fault. It was brought in by Ian Duncan Smith in a sort of a fit of public moralism in which he said it was basically the fault of the poor for having too many children. Well, I thought we've got past Victorian era thinking in this country.
I mean, Starmer's calculation is obviously that those people will always vote Labour against, you know, possible vote anywhere else. But
well, I think that's, again, a very dangerous assumption. They don't have to vote. They don't have to vote Labour. They can make their own choice. And people are well informed. They can see what's going on. And this very public debate, really, it's very odd when you've got 2 front benches agreeing to keep a cap on benefits, knowing the terrible effect it has on the poorest children in our society.
Don't go away, plenty more from Jeremy Corbyn and Liz and Jake too. Just a couple of minutes. Come back soon. Welcome back. In the next part of my interview with Jeremy Corbyn, I reflected on how Keir Starmer had thrown him out of Labour, but that Tony Blair never did, even though he rebelled against Blair many times. So I wondered if he agreed with, actually, Tony Blair himself, who more or less said to me earlier, as you noticed, that Starmer is tougher than he was.
I think we have a mood and an atmosphere in the Labour Party at the moment that is truly appalling and dreadful. The way in which many people have been suspended or lost their membership, and the stress and the mental health stress that people who've been 30 and 40 years in the Labour Party, it's been their life, it's been their social milieu, it's been everything, are suddenly told, you liked a tweet that somebody sent out 10 years ago from an organisation that we don't like. We are now retrospectively imposing a penalty on you and removing them from party membership.
I mean, just to be clear, Keir Starmer did say that if you'd apologised and, you know, backtracked on what you said after the Equalities Commission report on anti-Semitism, he would have had you in the party. Do you regret not doing that?
Listen, I made a statement when the EHRC report came out, which I stand by, and I have to say that everything that's happened since then, including the very thorough Ford inquiry into this, and as well as that, the Al Jazeera documentary, shows that everything I said was actually borne out by the facts of the time. Anti-Semitism is a vile, evil thing in our society,
Yeah.
just as much as any other form of racism is.
Now, one of the statements that Blair made was that...
What, today?
Today, just now to me in this interview. I mean, he said that the burden of tax in this country is too high and that we're already spending too much on public services.
Well, it's a very odd thing for him to say, but then he is a very wealthy man, so maybe he would be worried about taxes. But let's look at that. Let's just unpick that for a moment. If he's saying that the level of expenditure is too high on public services, and he doesn't want to say we're going to cut public services, then where does that lead you to, other than contracting out and privatisation, which in the end actually costs more? The Private Finance Initiative, the Building Schools for the Future Initiative, both of which he brought in.
But
yes, they build hospitals and schools, but we're all paying the price.
But you had a policy in both 2017 and 2019 to borrow significant sums to invest. I mean, surely you must recognise that with interest rates where they are now, that would be cripplingly expensive for the government.
It would obviously be expensive to borrow. Mind you, at the time we wrote those manifestos, the interest rates were very much lower. COVID hadn't happened. But nevertheless, if you don't borrow to invest, then what do you do other than destroy your public services?
Are you happy to be out of Labour now that they've moved in this direction?
Well, look, I'm very disappointed at the economic direction in which the party has moved. It seems to have given up on equality, given up on public ownership, and given up on the issues of benefits and poverty, such as the two-child policy.
So have you got a team to run a campaign as an independent?
Listen, I'm very busy all the time campaigning and working and so on. But just give you an example.
Yeah.
Public ownership, which has now been apparently dropped by the Labour front bench. Where is the case for not taking water into public ownership? Since privatisation, £72 billion has been taken out of our water industry. And what's happened? Sewage, pollution, waste, leakage and high bills. There is nothing other than a case.
But again, how would you take it into public ownership if you're not going to borrow at cripplingly high rates?
You take it into public ownership by an Act of Parliament to buy the industry, an Act of Parliament which would set the share value, and they would be given government bonds in return for the share value.
Now,
but if you don't do it, then what are we going to do? Be in hock to these water companies that are unbelievably inefficient and greedy.
Unfortunately, I'm told we're almost out of time, so I've got one very quick answer from you, please, which is, are you going to run for London Mayor?
I'll let you know.
Not a no, is it?
But you can't expect me to come on your wonderful programme and make...
And announce it. Yes, we expect you to come on the show and tell the people of the UK.
Well, is that an invitation to come back?
It's always an invitation to come back. Very good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
So one of the things I talked to both Blair and Corbyn about is quite how determined Keir Starmer is, how tough he is. I mean, do you think actually successive leaders of your party have rather underestimated him? Rishi Sunak tried calling him Sir Softy. He's not soft at all. He's one of the most ruthless leaders we've seen.
Well, I think what we've learnt about Keir Starmer is actually you can't trust a word that he says, because only, just a few years ago, he was campaigning and telling everyone in the country that Jeremy Corbyn was the right person to be our Prime Minister. He set out a series of commitments when he was seeking to be leader of the Labour Party, many of which he's ditched. And we now hear that after almost a decade of Labour politicians saying to the Conservative Party that actually the cap on child benefit going to your first two children only is completely wrong and they would reverse it, he's ditched that as well. So is he ruthless, or is he just sort of prepared to say anything, tell you anything, to try and... Hang on,
you're the party who believes that governing is more important than anything else. How can you criticise a Labour leader who says you can't do anything unless you win an election?
Well, I think you have to just look at the commitments he has made, the campaigning he's done for Jeremy Corbyn. He's now telling us he's going to do something completely different. On the basis he seems to have broken every other commitment or promise he's made to the British people at elections and otherwise. I just don't know how the British people can trust him, and that's why I don't think they will be supporting him.
I mean, Liz, there is, though, a point which is important, which is you cannot take the votes of traditional Labour supporters for granted. I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about the two-child limit on universal credit, but what is the argument for keeping the water industry, which many people would say has totally failed, in private ownership.
I was canvassing in one of the by-elections yesterday. A man who hadn't voted for us for the last 2 elections said he was coming back to Labour. I asked him why. He said, all that stuff you promised last time, it just wasn't credible. You're back on the right track. The public know we have good hearts. They want to know we have wise heads. And the reason winning is important is we cannot take a single child out of poverty if we're not in government. We can't tackle climate change. We can't put the NHS or social care back on track. You know, dreams without power, ideals without power is just dreaming. I don't just want to dream,
Liz,
I want to do.
sorry, I have got to wind you up, but I think you got your point across. Now, that's it. With MPs going on their holidays, we're taking a break till September. I'm off to write books. No rest for the wicked, eh? See you in a few weeks. Goodbye.